Hi, it's Sue Stockdale, your host for the Sports 2000 podcast. This series takes you behind the scenes of this British sports car prototype series that gives drivers the chance to compete at some of the UK and Europe's finest circuits every year. Today my guest is Ross Hyett, who competes in the Pinto category. Now Ross is a very seasoned racing driver. He has been on the podium over 150 times in his career and raced over 60 different purpose-built race cars. Welcome to the podcast, Ross.
Oh, thank you, Sue. Sounds like I've been doing it for too long, doesn't it?
Not at all. Now, in that career that you've had, that illustrious career that has involved racing at many prestigious races around the world, Ross, what have been some of the highlights that spring to mind when I ask you to reflect on that career? What have been some of your high points?
There's been so many. I know that a lot of people listening to this are racing drivers. They'll understand perhaps the comment that it isn't the winning. It's great. That's what we do it for. But it's actually the competing. And the things I remember are the races where you've really had to fight for it, or it's been a great race, or it's been one where it's been really challenging because it's wet. So it's not necessarily the podiums at Le Mans and winning various championships. It's the journey. And for me, it's always been that the checkered flag is kind of the end of it. It's actually the journey, the weekend, the being with your friends, racing with people that you respect, and everything else that goes with it. Motor racing is basically, for me, a series of disappointments with an occasional high. And once you've got your head around that, then you kind of approach it slightly differently.
And I understand that you're not only racing yourself, but you've also got your son Nick into racing as well, and that you're both also compete in Pinto cars. What inspired him to get started in racing, and what's it like racing against your son?
As a father, one of the most wonderful things is to be able to share your passion, whatever it is, with your family. I've got three sons. Nick, one of my sons, he was a captain of the Swiss rugby team, a very good rugby player, as all my family have been. He was concussed for something like the sixth time in 18 months. And we just said, oh, that's it. You've got to stop. I knew that having a similar experience as myself, that in the end, you become very depressed and very lost as to what you're going to do because this is your life and you're so fit. So I said, right, let's go motor racing, which went down really well with his mother, who seemed to think that putting him in a projectile that's going to hurtle around with just a crash helmet on was not perhaps the most sensible thing. So we got Nick on the racetrack, and he's a big lad. He's sort of 100 kilos and 6'3", so not your ideal racing driver, but he was naturally very good at it. It was fantastic to have him on the track with me, sharing the experience and understanding perhaps some of the passion. And he's turned into a great driver. Unfortunately, he lives in Switzerland, and getting him back this year to race again is going to be a challenge, but hopefully we'll get him through the COVID challenges and he'll be back on the track racing with me. And as we go forward, I've got other sons who are also interested in doing it, and we'll hopefully at some point have 3, maybe even 4 Hyetts on a grid together, which would be a frightening thought. And I'd like to apologise to everybody before we do it.
If you and Nick are on the same grid in the same race, who tends to be in the front?
Obviously, with my experience, I would expect to be ahead, but he's getting faster and faster all the time. And I do remember the first time we raced was at Silverstone, and I kind of led him round. We got to the last lap, and just before we went over the line, he was just behind me. So I decided to lift off the accelerator to let him go over the line and win. He, not knowing I was going to do this, virtually wrote off both our cars by missing me by a fraction of an inch, not realising what I was doing. And so I've learned that in future I just keep going as quick as I can. He's catching me all the time. It won't be very long before he's showing me the way home.
What's the attraction for you about driving a racing car? What does it do for you? What does it give you?
I suppose adrenaline. Adrenaline is the biggest buzz, and the sort of drug of choice for me is adrenaline. And the challenge of it, the buzz of doing it, of working with a team, all of those things are really it. It's challenging yourself and that satisfaction, because as I did say at the beginning, it is a series of disappointments. Motor racing is a cruel sport in terms of you just don't go out and everybody doesn't win. It doesn't happen like that. You have so many disappointments, and all you have to do is listen to the paddock and watch people's hands as they describe why they did or didn't manage to overtake you or crash into you, or this happened or that happened. And there is only one winner. So get over it. You're not going to win every race. So if you don't get pleasure from the experience, then give up. I get huge pleasure from it. I get pleasure from testing, pleasure from setting cars up, pleasure from getting involved in the whole process. So for me, it really is an all-encompassing hobby.
Now, you mentioned Le Mans at the start of our conversation today. And I know listeners that may have heard of the infamous Mulsanne Straight, that 6-kilometre piece of circuit, which used to be straight and people would be going at race speeds over 200 miles an hour, I understand. What are some of the high points and the recollections that you have of driving at Le Mans?
First of all, I have to correct you on the speed of 200 miles an hour. The fastest speed down the Mulsanne Straight was the WM Peugeot, which did 405 kilometres an hour, or 252 in English miles per hour. That's my first recollection, really. The first recollection is I did the race in '89, which was the last time that we had the Mulsanne Straight as is known, with just the kink in it. Myself and my teammate Robbie Sterling, we were pretty quick in those days, and we were fighting for pole position in our class. There were only two real classes, C1 and C2. And both of us went down the Mulsanne kink, and there was quite a bit of competition between us, and both of us got out with huge bravado about how we'd done it flat. And it was the race engineer, John McNeil, just had a big smile all over his face, and we didn't realise he put a potentiometer on the accelerator. So you went through flat. Oh, yeah, absolutely flat to the board, no problem at all. Of course, showed it. We had the biggest lift you've ever seen going into it. Both of us did. So anybody who tells you they did the Mulsanne kink flat out first time, my goodness me, they've got bigger kahunas than anybody I've ever seen. It takes some building up. It was scary. You literally started on one side, and it's a road. It's a main road, and like all roads, it's cambered on both sides. So you start on one side, and you effectively float over the top of it to the other side with your foot flat to the boards. And you hope every time you come out of it. And anybody who's looked at any of the old footage will see there's quite a few didn't. So the Mulsanne kink. So my next recollection is actually the WM Peugeot. First year we were there, Robbie and I were trading fastest laps, and I decided to get a tow off the WM Peugeot on one of their laps. Now, the WM Peugeot was really built just to get the highest speed down the Mulsanne kink. I don't think he'd ever finished the race. It probably only lasted a couple of hours. So I got tucked up the back of it. He passed me going onto the straight, and I just got stuck straight at the back of it trying to get a tow. And I did. I got a great tow. I could see, it's really strange, no matter how fast you're going, your vision is amazing. Your eyes, what they see and what they don't see. And you get this tunnel vision. I could see the fuel pump, and it looked like it was moving. And it was. It actually came off and went straight through the windscreen of the car. Little shards of glass went everywhere, and I got some glass in my eye. It was very strange how quickly I just knew I got to try not to blink. I could feel the glass in my eye, and I radioed ahead and told them what happened. So I went back relatively slowly as best I could to the pits. Luckily, the windscreen was somewhat intact. I could see it, and got into the pits, and the Jaguar team who were next door to us, the medic came out, and they'd already said, has anybody got any saline solution? And they sort of yanked my eye open and squirted a whole load of saline solution into it and got this bit of glass out of it. So I remember very, very much that Mulsanne Straight, and very much the WM Peugeot, and the noise and the sensation of this thing. It's like a bullet going straight through the windshield.
It certainly seems like there's a lot of drama potentially in a 24-hour race at Le Mans. And I know that those are part of the endurance racing type of scenarios. With Sports 2000, obviously it's completely different. You're only racing for 20-25 minutes generally. What is it that is noticeably different in terms of your approach to racing in those shorter Sports 2000 races compared to the likes of Le Mans?
It's a very good question. I think the Le Mans and all endurance racing, the period I did it, really the challenge was getting the car to the end. Nowadays, they are so reliable. They're almost bomb-proof. These cars, it's a sprint race from beginning to end. Absolutely amazing. The engineering has come on so much. In the days I did it, it was as much a challenge to keep the car going, to keep it all holding together, to get the gears to change without crunching them in any way, shape or form, and the clutch and the brakes and everything else. So therefore, you drove with great sympathy, great empathy. You literally just drove listening, feeling the whole car every minute. And you were more stressed by the fact that every noise you heard, you thought things were going to break down or not get back to the pits or whatever. And that was the challenge. Any type of modern day racing, everything's improved. Even the older cars, the internals have improved. Everything's a lot better. So you can actually sprint from the beginning of the race to the end, as in race as fast as possible. And your reliability, particularly with something like Sports 2000, is amazing. That these cars, they will just keep going unless you really abuse them or you miss a gear. Those engines are great. The cars are great. And you can have a whole season on relatively low costs compared to any other form of motor racing I've ever known.
Hi, it's me again. To let you know that support for this podcast comes from Broadtown Brewery, the microbrewery in Wiltshire with big ambitions. Their diverse assortment of beers range from classic best bitters and hoppy American West Coast IPAs, through to Baltic porters and Belgian triples. Only the best quality ingredients go into their beers, and their close attention to detail ensures that you can drink beers that are full of flavour and true to style. You can have them delivered straight to your doorstep, no matter where you live. So go on over to the website broadtownbrewery.co.uk and make your choice now. And in terms of driving around, say the likes of the circuit at Brands Hatch or Silverstone for that matter, what are you particularly paying attention to then? If you've got an increased level of trust, for example, with the car, you know it's going to be reliable. Where is your attention? Because I'm hearing you describe very much using your senses in the past, your sense of feel, your sense of sound, to be aware of what the car was doing because it wasn't as reliable. Nowadays, if that's different, where are you paying attention to now in a race?
These days, it tends to relate to either Chris Snowden or Mike Fry or Clive, anybody really, whoever is either ahead of me or just behind me. My focus of attention is either trying to stop them getting past me in the best way I can, which is by going faster, or trying to catch them. It's great because you really don't have to concentrate so much on the car. Once you've got the car set up, you're just racing, and that's the joy of it. You've just got to get your lines better. You've got to get quicker through the corners. You've got to carry your brake through the corners. It's a fantastic challenge and just great fun.
And in terms of Sports 2000 as a car, how does it compare to some of the other cars that you race? I know you're going to be racing in the Jaguar Mk1 this year and a Chevron B16 and a Lotus Elan at different events. How do you, in your mind, categorise what's unique and different about a Pinto compared to some of the other cars that you drive?
A great question. I think once you've got your helmet on and the lights have turned to green and you're racing. It doesn't matter whether you're in a go-kart, Lola T70, a Lotus Elan or whatever it is, you're racing and that's it, you're off. And you're trying to push that car to its limits and yourself to the limit of your talents. And so they are all different, but once you've got them set up and you've driven them a few times, you forget about what you're in, different gearboxes, different gear patterns, different rev ranges and all those different things. Either you can get your head around that or not. Once you've got your head around that each car is different and you drive to its appropriate limits, then you're just racing. It's just another car to race, another car to feel its movement through the corners. And again, your focus is just on either you're ahead of them or they're ahead of you and you're trying to catch them or you're trying to get away from them. And that's the joy of it.
It's not necessarily, as you say, anything particular about the car. It's about the experience of the race that's really important for you.
There is an aspect to the car, and it is, does it enable you to do what you'd like to do with it? So if you take a car like a Sports 2000, they are amazing cars. They have such good grip because they're on slicks. The engines are powerful enough. The times that we do are very, very comparable to, I got into this through racing at Silverstone with a friend of mine, Jeremy Hoyland, who asked me to share his car. The month before, I've been racing a Chevron B16, and I was amazed that this little Sports 2000 that I sort of jumped in and said, okay, fine, I'll drive it with you, not knowing really what it was. And Chris Snowden was engineering it and sort of explained how the gears and all the rest of it. Jumped on and I got out of that. It was about 4 seconds slower than my B16. Now, B16 is a B8, the derivative of a B8, and everybody goes, oh, that's an amazing car, and it's fantastic, and it's quick, and it looks great, and all those things. But it costs probably, I'll be generous, 10 times as much as a Sports 2000. To run the damn thing, it certainly costs 10 times as much as a Sports 2000. And yet its corner speed is almost identical. It's a bit quicker down the straight. And so if you love racing, and if you have a passion for the actual race rather than the ego or what you're driving or whatever, then it's just the most amazing value for money to be able to get in something at a tenth of the cost and still get the same buzz out of it. So, I became a convert there and then, and wanting to get Nick into racing, I thought this is the perfect thing for him to learn. And not just learn, and I don't mean that any disrespect to Sports 2000 in any way, shape or form, learn to a very, very high standard. Because if you can drive either the Duratex or a Sports 2000 Pinto at the front, then I believe, and I've driven just about every car that's got a roof on and covered wheels over the years and in so many different series, the standard of driving and the quality of skill you have to show to carry that speed through those corners is as high in this as most formulae that most people will ever aspire to get into.
Wow. Well, I can see why it's often described as motorsport's best kept secret as a category, because you're certainly giving it a lot of kudos in how you're describing the experience that it has compared to other cars, Ross.
I do nothing but encourage, if people come to me and say, right, what should we do? Unless you are some absolutely amazingly talented driver of extraordinarily skill, then you've got to just accept that motorsport is a business, and the business is to take the money off you to provide you with something to enable you to race. And you'll run out of money before you run out of talent in most people's cases. So rather than burn all your money driving something that you're never going to progress much further. I mean, I was listening to a description of motorsport the other day, and somebody said that to get to Formula One now will cost you about £8 million, starting from a go-kart and working through all the different formulae. So unless you've got a father or a family member who's got a huge amount of money and doesn't mind spending it on you, and you have the talent to do it, and that's assuming you've got the talent, then the reality is that you will probably run out of money before you run out of talent. So in which case, if you love motor racing and you want to do it for what it is, it's a sport, then why burn all your money? Just go and do Sports 2000. I grew up through go-karting, karting. I didn't have any money, and I loved the karting, but in the end, it was more expensive to do karting than it was to go motor racing at the top end. So yeah, Sports 2000 is a fantastic base to start, to learn, and in many cases to stay.
When you were there young, Ross, doing your karting in the early days, who did you look up to as role models or people you aspired to be like or to learn from them in motor racing in general?
That's a very good question. The people I grew up with, one of my best friends, a chap called Steve Styron, who was a world European karting champion. I always was very, very close to Steve and still am to this day, still a very, very good friend. He was a great talent. He and Terry Fullerton were sort of people who I hugely respected, huge talent. Both of them never went on into car racing. They didn't have the money, they didn't have the budget, but in terms of ability, extraordinary. And so those were in the karting world. Outside of that, you have to go to people like Tom Christensen, a 9-time Le Mans winner. Anything that Tom Christensen gets in, he's just phenomenally quick. And then just raw talent, Gilles Villeneuve, Ronnie Peterson, Senna, just sheer natural talent. Michael Schumacher as well, not given as much credit for the natural raw talent he's got. And I could bore you to death with some stories about Michael from some of his old engineers. He had huge talent. I know that he got into a Ferrari in the same way that Hamilton's got into either a McLaren or a Mercedes, but he's got raw talent as well.
Turning our attention to more recent motorsport and thinking about the future, let's start with this season, Ross. What are you looking forward to for the remainder of the time? What are your expectations for Sports 2000 this year?
Well, I'm going to concentrate on the Class A and Pinto. What I'm really looking forward to is racing again with my son, Nick. And hopefully this year, we're going to try to get a Pinto-only grid out. Certainly next season, we want to get some Pinto racers with only Pintos on. No disrespect to our Duratec friends. They are fantastic drivers and fantastic cars, but there is a speed differential. And if they're coming through, we need to give them space, and they also need to give us space. And there are times when it doesn't work. By sheer dint of force that we all could do with a bit more track space when this happens. So we're going to try to promote the Pintos and try to get more of them out there. So I'm really looking forward to helping the club achieve that. In a perfect world, we'll have a Duratec grid and a Pinto grid at the same race meetings. So that's what I'll be looking forward to. And the rest of it, just good, clean, fun racing with lots of friends and colleagues enjoying racing.
And just to come back to this question about a Pinto-only grid, is it just literally to do with numbers in that the club has to attract more drivers of Pintos to come out and race? Is that the only factor that stops it happening currently?
Well, I'm the new boy on the block, so I've only really been doing it for sort of a season and a half. But I think that there is a speed differential between the Duratecs and the Pintos, and we just have to accept that. And I think it will be great for all the Pinto owners. And I think there's about 70 of these cars in the UK. And hopefully we can attract some new younger members to come and join us and some of the old cars to come out. And that by having its own grid, I think it just can establish its own presence. It's very hard when you've got two make formulas, effectively, the Pinto and the Duratecs going round together. The Pinto is always going to be at best mid to back of the grid. And there's a lot of people out there who would prefer to be at the front of the grid, leading a race in their own right. It doesn't bother me at all. But if that's what gets us out onto a grid, gets more cars out there and gets greater competition, then that's fantastic. And I'm all for it.
Now, Ross, I understand that some of the rules have changed this season for Sports 2000 in terms of who can race in the cars and how they race. Tell me more about what's happened that's different.
Yeah, I think it's a great development, Sue. The rules have been changed so that you can now register the car and have two drivers. It's fantastic. So myself and my son can race. And I know that the first race of the season, we had Peter Needham racing with his son, Josh. All the races have now been organised, so there are two races at least each weekend. So you literally can have one car with two completely separate drivers, dads and lads or best mates, sharing the cost, which again has been the focus of this series, to try to keep the costs as low as possible with really competitive racing. And the car then carries the points. So you can still win the overall championship by just sharing the car with a friend or your son. I think it's a great development. And again, I'd be delighted to talk through this with anybody who'd like to know more.
That sounds brilliant and a great way, as you say, to encompass some of your family members in racing with you.
Well, I certainly will be doing it.
Well, I think these podcasts are doing a great job in selling the benefits of Sports 2000 as a whole to our listeners. So I hope that they will agree as they're listening to you talk today, Ross. Just thinking more broadly about the future of motorsport, what's your sense of where it might be heading to? We've got Formula E, we've got the X Prix, where they're going to different parts of the world. We've got Formula W with the women. Do you think it's going to be about broadening participation as a whole to all of society to get more involved in motorsport? Or what are your thoughts about where it might be heading in the future?
Electric cars, all things electric, it's a natural progression. And I believe in life that there's room for everybody and everything. The idea that older cars, their days are numbered, I would suggest that if people really believe that, just have a wander down to the Goodwood Revival. And there's 120,000 people there, all paying to go through there, go and watch these cars. These are not corporate hospitality, as in the Formula One, where half the people go there that are not paying for their tickets. These are people who want to go and watch these cars. And it's fantastic. The cars move, they slide. And I think watching cars go around on rails, which is what a Formula E appears to be at the moment, and Formula One, there's only so much of that you can watch and convince yourself that it's exciting. So for me, I like to see lots of overtaking, lots of car control, the ability of the driver to actually be greater than the car. But maybe that's more of a purist. So I don't care whether it's a Formula E, battery-driven, wind-driven, it doesn't really matter. But I'd like to see the driver having more of an influence than the mechanical side of it in terms of the mechanical grip or the electrical impedance creating whatever. Great, let it crack on. But if it's just following each other around, that's not racing, that's just a procession and it's boring. So I believe that for everybody to have fun, you need to be able to see overtaking and people being able to show their skill.
You've definitely left us today with the sense that the joy of driving is a really important part of any motor racing category. And I hope those that are listening to this podcast get enthused by what your recollections and your energy has demonstrated to us, Ross, and they might turn up and watch a Sports 2000 race at some stage in the future.
Hopefully they will come soon, but also if they do, if they're interested, if there's fathers listening to this and their sons or daughters are wanting to get into it, then come to a Sports 2000 race and come to the paddock and come and talk to everybody, because you won't find a more welcoming, open set of people and people who will help you. Because the one thing in motorsport I did find is that as you progress in it, it gets harder and harder in terms of getting any information from anybody and any help. And the big thing about the Sports 2000 is everybody will help you. If you have a mechanical problem, if you have a setup problem, if you don't know what to do, everybody in there will just come up and give you a hand if you want it. And that's one of the joys of Sports 2000 that I would like to suggest to people who are listening to this who are not already fans of Sports 2000.
So if they do come along, what number is your car, Ross? What should they look out for and what colour is it?
Well, at the moment it's green, but knowing Chris Snowden, it could change at any time, is number 69.
Lovely. Thank you so much for your time today, Ross. It's been fantastic to hear your recollections of your motorsport career, and I hope it continues long into the future.
You're very, very kind, and I hope to see you at the track, and everybody else who would love to come and see us, please do come.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Ross Hyett. And if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please help us to spread the word by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts and telling your friends about this podcast too. Remember, you can connect with Sports 2000 on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and we shall put links to the website in the show notes.